Morning, Missio. Alex here again for your friendly Sunday morning host. If this is your first time, then welcome. Follow the link in the description below to our website and get to know us a little bit. If you'd like us to get to know you, then sign up for news and updates. This morning we have a few songs with Tyler and Tara and a message from Jared. So let's head to the backyard.
Both of us go to the chorus,
Okay.
and then you repeat the chorus, and I'll sing
The bridge.
the bridge,
Okay.
and then we both sing the bridge together to end it.
Yeah, let's do
Because
that.
it feels weird to end on the yeah after the
Yeah.
end
Okay.
shout, yeah.
So 1A, 1B, chorus, and then 2 times?
Yeah.
And then I'll stay in the chorus and you go to the bridge.
Yeah, you'll end up doing the chorus.
All the poor and powerless, and all the lost and lonely, all the thieves will come confess and know that you are holy, and know that you are holy, and all will sing out hallelujah, and we will cry out hallelujah. All the hearts who are content, and all who feel unworthy, and all who hurt with nothing left, will know that you are holy, and all will sing out hallelujah, and we will cry out hallelujah, and all will sing out hallelujah, and we will cry out hallelujah. Shout it, go on and scream it from the mountains, go on and tell it to the masses that He is God. Shout it, go on and scream it from the mountains, go on and tell it to the masses that He is God. We will sing out hallelujah, and we will cry out hallelujah, and we will sing out hallelujah.
There are stories in the world that speak to our hearts in powerful ways and cause us to think, reflect, and be moved to action in ways maybe we hadn't previously done. Stories that inspire and make us stand in awe of the hope of possibility. And then there are stories that cause us less to be inspired to action and more cause us to enter deep within ourselves to explore the depths of what we have been unable to express or unwilling to share. Stories that reach right through every barrier that we've set up around our hearts and grab hold of us and shake us in our bones. Sometimes it's not just the story that does this, but the season of life that we find ourselves in that causes that depth of reflection and the inner workings of our soul to cry out. I was telling a friend this week that the stories of Hezekiah and David and Solomon from the Bible have caused a reaction within me that I've never before experienced. And it's because for this season of time, I'm reading stories like this through a lens that has never before existed in our modern world. And yes, certainly pieces of the lens have been present, but not the entire lens as we have it right now. Global pandemic causing levels of disconnect, anxiety, and pain, a collective outcry on behalf of people pressed down by the systems of racism that have plagued our world for too long. Uncertainty and fear for the future in waves never before experienced in the 35 years of my life. And in this season, we hear stories, we read stories, we watch stories, and they speak to us in ways that they couldn't 4 months ago. If you know me very well, then you know I'm the kind of person that lives to be near others, to be in relationship with people. And in a season when the connection to people has been stripped away, I find myself watching movies like Elf and not laughing at it, but crying because all he wanted was to be loved by his father. And no, that's not my story. I'm not an elf looking for my father in New York. But in seasons that uproot so much of what we know and feel secure in, when we see the things that we long for most in the stories that we consume, it causes those inner yearnings, those deep down longings that maybe we've made a habit of burying deeper and deeper or simply ignored to come rushing to the forefront of our being. And this can be a good thing, because when it comes to stories in Scripture, the lens through which we read and interpret what we are reading is so important. We're always reading and understanding the stories of God in Scripture through the lens of our experience. There's no escaping that. And the more life experience we have, the broader our understanding of what is happening in God's story becomes. This season for me has caused me to see the unbelievable reality of some of the stories that we've looked at. From Ruth's incredibly challenging, bold, strong love for her mother-in-law to Hezekiah's unbelievable resilience and perseverance in the face of unbelievable challenge and uncertainty, to David's pleas in the cave of Adullam from last week, having been called and promised the kingship by God, to running for his life and hiding in a cave from the ousted but still ruling king. And then to this week's story of David's son Solomon, the wisest person to ever live, who suffered from a level of depression that I think a lot of us can relate to. These are stories of real people who had real issues and real struggles, who really did walk with the Lord and failed time and again, but still found their stories remembered in the story of God in Scripture. And in this season, their stories have spoken to me and to a part of my heart that had previously been locked by the comfort of what feels normal. And a lot of us are longing to go back to normal, but we cannot and we should not seek to go back to the normal that was before this season, because what normal implies is the going back to the comforts that locked parts of our hearts away from being exposed to ourselves so that we could finally grow. And this is a really hard truth, that this season is attempting to unlock parts of our heart, our inner being, that we have walled off from the work of God. God is working on all of us in different and unique ways, and He has still been using this season to continue to work on those parts of our heart. For some of us, what He's revealing is that we are realizing that we have not only benefited from systems of oppression, but we've been riding that system, content to disagree with it every now and then, but not really enough to really fully reverse course. For some of us, it's the realization that we've been hurting so long and we've convinced ourselves and the people around us that we're okay. For others of us, it's the realization that we have used being with people or working out or doing good deeds as an excuse to not spend time with the Lord. And that one's my story. That's part of me. You know, whatever it is, this season in time is a terrible season, challenging season that is revealing more about ourselves than maybe we realize. And the harsh truth is that we are often resistant to the things that are being revealed. But don't be, because growth happens through challenge. And the stories that we're reading are not just meant to be downloaded into your brains so that you can tell a story that's not your own. These stories that we're looking at are meant for you to sit with, to wrestle with, to allow you to find your own story within them, to see how relationships are worth everything from Ruth's story, to be okay with naming the fact that we are all exhausted like Hezekiah, but that perseverance and resilience comes through prayer and going to God, to be okay with the tension of not being able to be okay with the tension of being called to action in God's kingdom, but unable to move because of extraordinary circumstances that cause us to write prayers to God of confusion and pleading with Him. This morning is one of those stories that is less inspiring to action and more has caused me to dig deep within the depths of myself to see how much of Solomon's story really reflects my own heart right now, and especially the parts in Ecclesiastes that he looks at. You know, Solomon was the son of David and Bathsheba, and last week we looked at David's life and we didn't get a chance to finish it. So I want to encourage you to go back and read the rest of David's life. But if you remember, we said that David started as a man after God's own heart, but then the end of his life and reign began to slowly go downhill. And the story of Bathsheba is a textbook example of this, where David is spying on Bathsheba as she is taking a bath, and then David has her husband killed and then takes her for his wife. They have a child, and their first child dies shortly after childbirth, but then their second son, Solomon, eventually becomes king of Israel after David's reign is over. And you can learn more about the timeline of Solomon's reign from 1 Kings. You know, it was said that he came to the throne at 20 years of age. And yes, certainly his father David, his rule had so many flaws to it, but it was still considered the benchmark for what a king of Israel looked like and acted like and would be like. And so shortly after Solomon becomes king, he goes away with the Lord, and there's this one night where God shows up in a dream to Solomon. He gives him this crazy statement. He says, "Ask whatever you want of me, Solomon." This is a crazy thing for God to tell this brand new young king of Israel, to which Solomon responds in 1 Kings 3, verses 6 through 9. He says, "You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" God says that He's pleased with Solomon's request, and He makes Solomon the wisest person who's ever lived, to where nobody before him or after him would be able to be compared to the wisdom of Solomon. Solomon's fame begins to grow as people from all over the known world came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and he gains huge fortune as they're paying for the use of his wisdom. And as his fame grew, so did his endeavors as God tells Solomon to build him a temple in which the presence of God would reside in. And so Solomon builds one of the most grand temples in all of the ancient world. He then builds for himself a palace to match. And after 20 years of building and growing in fame and fortune, Solomon continued to have people from all over the world come to hear of his wisdom, to hear of the things that Solomon had to say, and to see his grand structures. But slowly, Solomon's attention turned away from God and onto his own splendor and pleasure. He took wives from, well, basically everywhere. He sets up shrines all over the place. And once again, God shows up to Solomon, but this time he says, "Why, Solomon? Why?" God had essentially told Solomon that he would hold nothing back from him if only he would be faithful to him. And in all of Solomon's wisdom, he failed to be faithful to God's request to love and serve him alone. God tells Solomon that his son would come to the throne and would tear the kingdom in two and would continue to lead people further and further away from the covenant relationship with God. And this is what eventually leads to the divided kingdom, with Israel being in the north and Judah in the south. And it's 250 years after this moment that Hezekiah comes to the throne and spends much of his reign attempting to heal the divide, to unite what Solomon's unfaithfulness destroyed. And so remember that Scripture is often broken into these different categories. And so you can read the timeline of events of Solomon's reign in 1 Kings. But if you really want to understand the heart of Solomon, the agony of Solomon, the depression of Solomon, you need to look at the book of Ecclesiastes. There are historical figures that you learn about in school, and the history classes are really concerned with helping you know the breadth of a person's story and their impact on history. And so you read these textbooks that give you the information from point A to point B of a person's life, but they don't really tell you much else about who they were. But every now and then, there are these historical leaders who leave behind their personal journals for us to look at. And the difference between a textbook and a personal journal is that the textbook tells about a person's life, whereas that person's personal journal talk about their heart, their inner thoughts, their struggles. And in a lot of ways, Ecclesiastes functions as the journal entries of Solomon's life. They go past the activity of his life and they go straight to the heart of his struggles. One of the questions that I've always had about Solomon was why he made so many bad decisions at the end of his life when he was supposed to be the wisest person who ever lived. I mean, doesn't wisdom imply knowing between what is right and what is wrong? I mean, this is the very thing that Solomon asked God to give him, the ability to know the difference between what is right and wrong, the discerning heart to know the difference. But there's a difference, I think, between wisdom and the choices that we make. Wisdom is defined simply as this: the having of experience, knowledge, and good judgment, and then the capacity to make due use out of it. So whereas choice requires action, wisdom requires understanding the differences between every available action, and then the ability to choose the one that will lead to your desired outcome. Wisdom does not necessarily imply right action, but it does have the ability to see and understand every available action and where that action or choice might lead, which means that a person with a great amount of wisdom can still make poor choices, because ultimately the choice is theirs to make. And so for Solomon, who possessed greater wisdom than had ever been possessed, still when seeing what was right, chose what was wrong. And we can make the case that then those decisions were unwise, but it was still his choice to make. He still had the capacity to choose what was right and didn't. And in part, I believe this is where the conversation in Ecclesiastes stems from. See, because when a person possesses greater wisdom than anyone in the world has ever possessed, they don't just see all the good, shiny things in the world. More often they see all of the things that are wrong with the world, all the brokenness and all the atrocities. And in Solomon's case, he not only saw all of the brokenness, but he also saw humanity's inability to fix that brokenness, and it caused him to enter into a place of despair that I imagine few had ever entered before him. You know, a quick overview of Ecclesiastes shows a man who was hurting, someone who sees the condition of the world and feels powerless to change it. Solomon begins in chapter 1 by saying that everything is meaningless. He says that people's labor is meaningless because everything they build will eventually just rot and decay away anyways. He even says that relationships are basically meaningless because people come and go. He says that pleasure and wisdom are meaningless, that he pursued every knowledge and wisdom and none of it changed anything. And then he pursued every pleasure that there was to know, and they led to momentary satisfaction but no real change. He then begins to call attention to the injustices that he sees, that people are constantly asserting their power over others to control them, to gain wealth over them, to oppress them. People steal and hoard for themselves at the expense of others, that rich people never have their thirst for more quenched. He says, I see the injustices of the righteous people perishing in their righteousness and wicked people living long lives in their wickedness. He says it doesn't make any sense. How is it that the righteous get what the wicked deserve and the wicked get what the righteous deserve? He says it just doesn't make any sense. He says it feels pointless to have wisdom and then to work hard to build something of meaning when people can just come after you who have no wisdom and who don't build things with meaning, and they can come in and swoop in and destroy the things that you've built. At one point he says time and chance happen to everyone. In other words, time is the one thing that none of us can escape and will eventually become captive to. And that chance of luck lands on anyone that it pleases. But oppression and greed still exist everywhere. And all throughout Ecclesiastes, you get this impression that Solomon sees the extent to which the condition of humanity had degraded into postures of self-indulgence, self-seeking power, the accumulation of wealth for people's self at the expense of others, working for nothing, the loss of everything. And yet throughout the book, he inserts these little nuggets of truth about God that keep him grounded and moving forward. So he says in chapter 3 that everything God does will endure forever, that nothing can be taken from it and nothing can be added to it. In chapter 2 he says that all good things come from God and we enjoy them because of God. He says that finding joy in what you do is a gift from God. In chapter 11, he says that we can't possibly understand everything that God is doing, and so we just keep on doing what we're doing, trusting in God. And then he ends the book by saying we need to trust in God because God will bring judgment on the evil in the world. And see, I think at the heart of what Solomon is expressing in all of Ecclesiastes was this simple truth, that all the wisdom in the world is powerless to change the world apart from the work of God in it. See, I think you see in Ecclesiastes that Solomon is feeling frustrated, he's feeling irritated, he's feeling helpless, that his wisdom will continually fall short to make a difference in the brokenness and the evil that he sees. And see, I was reading this story this week and I was listening to the heart of Solomon, and I couldn't help but feel all the exact same things of what he was describing. And no, I'm not the wisest person in the world. I'm not even the smartest person in the world, but I've worked hard to learn how to lead churches, how to lead people, how to share the goodness of Jesus with people, and I feel sometimes like I'm chained to things that I feel around me. I can't heal COVID. I can't undo hundreds of years of systemic racism alone. I can't solve the homelessness and poverty by myself. I can't heal marriages or make newborns cry less so that their parents can sleep more. I can't find jobs for everyone, and I can't bring joy to people's work for them. More than any point in my ministry life, I feel powerless to do much of anything. Why? Why can't I change the parts of myself that I know need changed? I need more self-discipline. I need more humility. I need to stop hiding my pain behind the mask of dumb jokes or making people laugh. Why can't I forgive people who have hurt me when I know that forgiveness is what God asks of me? See, I am more like the faults of David and Solomon than I care to admit. It's just that I'm not as good of a leader as David or as smart and wise as Solomon. And my fear is that I'm not enough, that I don't have enough. And last week, Laura and I, we asked you guys, we challenged you to write your cave psalm, your quarantine psalm to God. And I want to just share mine with you right now. It's only 13 words long, and it says this: God, I'm not enough to do this, so you have to be. Countless books on ministry, classes in grad school, or professors will tell pastors not to share their struggles. But almost every time I read Scripture, I see the exact opposite. Men and women of faith, leaders in God's kingdom, laying their hearts out to God for people to see. Because the truth is, we all feel these things from time to time. And if you're hurting right now, if you're frustrated by the things that you see in the world, and if you are lost at what to do in your metaphorical cave of Adullam, you need to know that you're not alone in it. You actually have some pretty good company. You have David, who was a man after God's own heart. You have Solomon, who was the wisest king to ever live. You have Ruth, known for her depth of love for her mother-in-law. You have Hezekiah, who prayed instead of fought. You have Hannah, who prayed for a son and then dedicated that son to God. You have Joshua, who stepped into Moses' shoes as leader of God's people and trusted in impossible circumstances. You have Esther, who we're going to learn about later, who rose to a place of influence and used it to bring healing and power to God's people, and countless more people, imperfect people, who faced unprecedented hardships and challenges and unknowns, and through whom God shaped the story of humanity's relationship with Him. See, what stories like David in the cave and Solomon's heart cries in Ecclesiastes do is they help you feel less alone when you find yourself in those places. They give words to describe the pain, to describe the loneliness, and describe the feelings of inadequacy. And maybe just for a moment, they give you the courage to not run from what is deep inside of you, but to embrace it as part of the journey that will develop the faith that will trust in God, who brings healing and change to the world. We read these stories not because we're going to soon hand out some multiple choice test to see if you know the textbook answers to the timeline questions. That's not why we do this. But because we want you to know that life with God will mean that sometimes we have to write your cave psalm or your Ecclesiastes letter. Not every moment will feel like this. Right? Not every moment will feel this intense or challenging. And this is exactly what Solomon is getting after in Ecclesiastes. He says sometimes the season is going to be one of hardship and challenge. Other seasons are going to be filled with joy and excitement. Other seasons you're going to experience loss. But God isn't only God over the good times in your life. He is God of every single season that we can live into in our humanity, including the ones that we find ourselves in now. And so here's the promise that I want to make to you. We as Missio will continue to be the sent out people of God for the city of Seattle. We will keep living into this movement of Jesus to work hard to bring justice to oppressed people, to work toward building a great city for all people to live in. And when we feel the weight of that journey, when we don't know the steps forward, when we feel confused or we're feeling lost and like we're not enough, we're going to rise up for each other. We're going to stand tall next to one another, and we're going to carry the burden with each other. In John chapter 13, Jesus tells his disciples that he's giving them a new command to love one another as I have loved you. And why was loving one another a new command? Because essentially Jesus was saying it doesn't go far enough to just simply love people. You've got to love them the way I loved them, sacrificially, without question, fully and completely. And the more that we love each other, the more people around us will see that love. And this love doesn't quite make sense, but they're going to want to know more about it. You know, this journey that you're not on by yourself. You're not alone in this journey, and the journey is not yours alone. It's God's with you, and God has called us all to go on this journey together. You know, I love you guys, and I can't wait to be with you soon.
I will sing of your goodness. I will sing of your love. Though the seasons come quickly, you have always been enough. Though the night may get darker, though the waiting seems long, you have always been faithful to remind me of your love. You are good. In the morning I'll sing you are good. In the evening I'll sing you are good. You are good to me. You are good. In the morning I'll sing you are good. In the evening I'll sing you are good. You are good to me. You have always been patient. You have always been kind. You're consistent through the ages. Oh, what a friend of mine. I remind my soul to bless you, standing firm upon your truth, knowing you not cannot be shaken, 'cause I've seen what you can do. You are good. In the morning I'll sing you are good. In the evening I'll sing you are good. You are good to me. You are good. In the morning I'll sing you are good. In the evening I'll sing you are good. You are good to me. You keep on getting better. 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 Keep on getting better. You keep on getting better. Keep on getting better. You keep on getting better. Keep on getting better. You keep on getting better. Keep on getting better. You keep on getting better. Keep on getting better. Keep on getting better. Keep on getting better. You are good. In the morning I'll sing you are good. In the evening I'll sing you are good. You are good to me. the morning I'll sing you are good. In the evening I'll sing you are good. You are good to me.
I think we kind of did it, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today. Hope to see you again next week. Just a few announcements before we go. Just a reminder that Missio Kids meets every week on YouTube, Sundays at 9:45. So make sure to tune in next week for that. Also, we had a first great week of the Missio anti-racism groups, both on Zoom and in person, and there's still time to sign up if you want to participate in that. I think that's it. Bye.